My boss, Susan Anderson, is renowned for her dedication and competence at work. However, after a few drinks, she transforms into a lively, almost unrecognizable version of herself, so different from her usual demeanor that it's startling. One night, I ended up escorting an intoxicated Susan home, stumbling upon a scene I never anticipated. My name is Jeff Carter, 26 years old. I had recently been reassigned to a new department after a few years with the company, and I was struggling to adapt to the unfamiliar tasks. Jeff, you've made a mistake here. Susan's voice cut through the office noise, guiding me with her notoriously stern manner. At 37, she possessed an ageless beauty that captivated every newcomer. You've made this mistake twice now. Can you try not to make me repeat myself? I'm sorry, I mumbled, feeling the weight of her icy stare. Any glimmer of hope quickly faded under her sharp words. Yet, despite her harsh demeanor, some employees found her intimidating nature appealing. However, I was too focused on quickly adapting to my job to see her as anything other than a superior. I lost my father at a young age, and my mother single-handedly raised my brother and me. I joined this Fortune 500 company with aspirations to repay my mom, even just a little. This drive pushed me to prove myself at work as soon as possible, leaving little room for any special feelings towards my female coworkers. What truly excited me was that Susan, one of the company's top employees, had agreed to mentor me. This was my opportunity to learn from the best. Her strict training was challenging, often making me want to run away, but I was determined to persevere. A few months passed since my transfer, and just as I was starting to get the hang of things, Susan and I were invited to a client dinner. I had heard that Susan could handle her liquor well, and that she became exceptionally lively when she drank, always managing to enliven the atmosphere. The clients seemed to enjoy her company quite a bit, and as her direct subordinate, I was also invited. The evening was filled with toasts over an exquisite meal. Let's drink more, Susan. I'll drink on your behalf, I offered as the restaurant owner announced a new spirit to try. Susan seemed to be getting tipsier than usual, likely exhausted from her constant grind at work. The client, fond of Susan, kept refilling her glass relentlessly. Pour me another, she said, energized, drinking at a faster pace. Although she appeared to be having fun, I noticed moments when she seemed worn out. I decided to step in. Let me have that drink, please, I said, taking the drinks intended for her. The clients, realizing I could hold my liquor, enthusiastically began serving me. I felt like I was drowning in endless rounds of toasts, while Susan, incessantly chatting next to me, was a stark contrast to her usual stern self at the office. Work is my life, she confessed, but she couldn't stop talking about everything from personal hobbies to her passion for work. She was not only an eloquent speaker but also a good listener, engaging everyone in the conversation. As the evening wound down and the clients left, satisfied as usual, I watched them until they disappeared from sight. Suddenly, Susan slumped over, the tension leaving her body. Sorry, I can't anymore, she murmured, hanging her head low. With Susan too tipsy to make it home alone, I took on the responsibility of getting her back safely. Susan, is this the right place? You got it, probably, she replied, her voice slurred. After half an hour of supporting her staggering steps, we finally arrived at her apartment. Welcome to my castle, she giggled as she pointed to the building. When we entered, Susan collapsed in the entryway. Worried she might fall asleep there, I gently said, Susan, you'll catch a cold if you sleep here. Is it okay if I carry you to your room? After she nodded, I carefully entered her apartment. But as soon as I stepped inside, I couldn't believe my eyes. Clothes and books were strewn across the floor, and garbage was left on the table. Sorry it's messy, right? She said with a tired smile. I think so too. Jeff, take a seat. Have some coffee or something. Seeing this side of her, one that no one at work knew, gave me a strange sense of superiority. Suddenly, Susan began tidying up the room cheerfully. Susan, I'm heading home soon, so don't mind me, I said, not wanting to impose and eager to let her rest. However, watching her stagger as she tried to clean up, I decided to help. Even if it was meddling, I couldn't leave her like that. You're good at this, she remarked. I'm not so efficient at work. I've always been good at housework, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry. Even though I still struggle to work independently without Susan's guidance at the office, I never imagined these skills would come in handy here. Susan, perhaps because she was drunk, was trying to tidy up. But somehow she was only making more of a mess. Every time she moved a pile of clothes to the laundry, she bumped into something, dropping it. She even confessed that she was terrible at sorting garbage and had eventually given up, leaving it scattered everywhere. Despite this, she was determined to clean up. Seeing her like this, so different from her usual efficient self, was the second time that day I noticed the gap between her work persona and who she was at home. For the first time, I thought Susan was cute. Even though we had a 10-year age difference, I wondered if it was wrong to think of her that way. While these thoughts crossed my mind, Susan headed to the balcony to get the laundry, but her unsteady feet caused her to stumble over the step, and it looked pretty dangerous. I watched, feeling anxious, only to catch sight of her colorful underwear hanging there, and my face grew hot. "Don't look," she exclaimed, quickly hiding it behind her back. Her face turned as red as mine, and the embarrassment seemed to sober her up a bit. She started talking less, and the atmosphere grew awkward. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to look," I apologized, gathering the trash and looking for an opportunity to leave. "Is this all the trash?" I asked, hoping to wrap things up. But when I turned back, Susan had fallen asleep while folding laundry. I gently covered her with a blanket, left a note, borrowed the key left out, locked the front door, and placed it in her mailbox. The next day was Saturday, and as I nursed a slight hangover, I received a call from Susan. She expressed her gratitude for taking her home and apologized for her embarrassing behavior. Remembering the events of the previous night, I couldn't help but smile. I assured her it was no trouble and mentioned that, while I don't usually drink, I was also nursing a hangover. Sunday passed, and on Monday, I was back at work, ready to start the week. However, I was soon summoned by Susan. My heart raced. Had I made a mistake? I followed her to the break room, where she nervously asked, "Jeff, you were in my apartment, right?" Panic set in. Had I done something wrong by entering her home? I decided to be honest. "I'm sorry. I guess you didn't like me entering your house." I chose to apologize sincerely. But instead of the scolding I expected, Susan thanked me. "I can't remember much after the party started. I'm ashamed I got so drunk. You took me home, didn't you?" "It was nothing," I replied, relieved. But then she continued, "So, you saw inside my apartment, right? I'm really sorry you saw my embarrassing side." She bowed and apologized profusely. "Susan, please lift your head. You didn't trouble me in any way, and I honestly didn't mind," I urged her, trying to ease her worries. When she looked up, her face was as red as before. "You found out I'm bad at housekeeping, didn't you?" Susan murmured awkwardly. She then began to share why she struggled with it. Susan had been working part-time since college to contribute to her sick mother's medical bills. While her father and she worked to cover living and medical expenses, her sister took care of the housework. "I've always been indifferent to housework, and even now, I can't shake that habit. Even though I can handle work, I'm terrible at housekeeping," she confessed, looking sad. I didn't understand why she was telling me this, but when she laughed and mentioned that all her previous partners had broken up with her because she couldn't do housework, I couldn't help but interrupt. "What's wrong with not being able to do housework?" I asked, genuinely curious. Susan looked surprised, her eyes wide. "I mean, everyone has strengths and weaknesses, right? The idea that women should naturally be good at housekeeping is outdated." I stated that there's no point in being together if you can't complement each other's weaknesses. Susan burst out laughing as if a weight had been lifted off her chest. "Jeff, thank you," she said, smiling beautifully. From that moment, I began to notice Susan in a different light. One day, Susan fell ill and had to take the day off. We had an urgent project going on, and a colleague named Mark stepped in to help. Mark, who was 36 and recently married to a younger woman, couldn't stop boasting about it while the rest of us were busy with work. "You know, I actually dated Susan," Mark casually mentioned, causing my hands to stop for a moment. I forgot to breathe. "But Susan, she acts competent at work, but she's utterly hopeless at housekeeping." As he continued to badmouth Susan, I felt a surge of anger. "Don't you think it's inconceivable for a woman to be incapable of doing housework?" He laughed, but the room felt tense, and everyone seemed repulsed by his comments. Susan always worked harder than anyone else, and she had shamefully admitted to me that she wasn't very good at housekeeping. I couldn't accept Mark's remark, so I objected. "What's wrong with a woman who can't do housework?" Surprised and annoyed by my sudden opposition, Mark's face twisted in irritation. But when the other employees also voiced their objections, he had no choice but to retreat back to his department with a disgruntled look. After work, I decided to check on Susan. "Susan, it's me, Jeff," I said through the intercom. She looked wary when she opened the door. "Jeff, what's up? Did something go wrong at work?" I assured her that wasn't the case and that I came to visit her. Apologizing for the mess, she let me in. "Susan, can you eat anything?" I asked, noticing she still looked drained from her fever. She just shook her head and took a seat on the couch. I made her some simple rice soup in her kitchen, and she happily accepted it. "Jeff, you'll make a good husband," she said with a gentle smile. In front of that smile, I couldn't hide my feelings anymore. "I want to be your husband, Susan," I confessed in the heat of the moment. Naturally, Susan was surprised and even dropped her cup. "What are you saying, Jeff? I'm over 10 years older than you, and I can't even do housework. There are plenty of younger, more domesticated girls out there. You should reconsider." Though Susan's voice sounded sad, I knew I couldn't back down now. Age doesn't matter to me. As for housework, we can support each other. You've always supported me at work, so I'll support you at home. My confession, akin to a marriage proposal, left Susan looking baffled, but she eventually responded with a happy smile. "I'm really touched by your feelings, Jeff, but could we maybe start as friends? I can't even think about dating someone right now," Susan said, her voice soft but firm. My heart sank a little, thinking she might be rejecting me. Was this her subtle way of letting me down easy? I felt confused by her proposal to remain friends, but I decided that staying positive was the best way to move forward. "Absolutely," I replied, smiling. I then spent the rest of the visit explaining why I liked her, and Susan listened with a bashful smile. After I left, she texted me a single word: "Thanks." It felt like I was experiencing the innocence of first love all over again. On the way home, I found myself running as fast as I could, exhilarated by the thought of what could be. The next day, Susan returned to work, and the project we had been working on proceeded smoothly to its conclusion, much to everyone's relief. Inspired by this success, I decided to take on a new challenge, a call for proposals for a new project within the company. Susan encouraged me to participate, even though I hadn't achieved anything particularly noteworthy in my career yet. After my father passed away from an illness, my mother raised my brother and me on her own. I wanted to repay her kindness in some way. If my proposal was accepted, I felt I could do something meaningful. Under Susan's guidance, I worked hard on this new project, which focused on providing emotional care for people caring for sick family members. Given our company's connections with healthcare institutions, I thought we could make a real difference. The pain that individuals and their families go through is immeasurable. I had seen it firsthand. I still vividly remember my mom crying in secret when she found out about my dad's illness. Although I couldn't save him, I wanted to be there for others in similar situations. My project proposal, filled with these emotions, won the CEO's award. "Congratulations, Jeff," Susan said, bringing a cake to celebrate. Her eyes were filled with joy. "This is all thanks to you, Susan." "Thank you," I said, taking the cake, trying to hide my shyness. "What's this? Are you two an item?" Mark taunted us upon seeing Susan and me together. Mark snorted in amusement and turned to me. "Stay away from Susan. She can't even do household chores. You'll be fed up soon." "I know because I broke up with her for that," he said, laughing and insulting Susan. Susan was about to retaliate, but I stepped in between them. "I seriously like Susan. It doesn't feel good to have someone like you insulting her. Could you apologize?" I said firmly. Susan blushed at my straightforward words, and Mark, perhaps not expecting that I was truly in love, looked surprised. "Susan is much older than you, Jeff. Aren't there plenty of better women out there?" Mark sneered, which dimmed Susan's mood again. "Age doesn't matter, and what's wrong with not being able to do household chores?" I countered. Unable to respond to my words, Mark glared and walked away without saying another word. I added, "Susan has many wonderful qualities beyond her struggles with household chores. Mark, you knew these qualities and that's why you liked her, right?" Perhaps my words struck a chord because Mark looked guilty for a moment as he glanced at Susan before leaving the room without a word. An awkward silence filled the space we were left in. It was as if I had just made a public confession. While I was trying to figure out what to say, Susan broke the silence. "Thank you for defending me, Jeff. I'm really happy you did. And your confession made me happy too," she said, thanking me over and over again. "I just did what was right. I replied. I like you too, Jeff, she said with a faint smile. I couldn't help but cheer at this unexpected development. I did it, I exclaimed, and Susan laughed at my reaction. I laughed along with her, and that's how we officially started dating. A year later, Susan came to my family home and put her hands together in front of my father's gravestone. After winning the Seagulls Award for my project proposal, I was promoted. To celebrate, I took my mom and brother on a trip to a place full of memories with my parents. My mom remembered my dad and cried while smiling, and my brother and I also cried, remembering our father. The reason Susan came to my family home was to ask for my mother's approval for our marriage. My mom happily gave her blessing and asked Susan to take care of me. Susan bowed her head and thanked her. One notable thing that happened afterward was that Mark, who had once looked down on Susan, came to apologize. After getting married and having a child, a cold atmosphere had begun to spread in his home because he didn't help with the chores. His wife's words, echoing the hurtful ones he'd once hurled at Susan, made him reflect on the past. He remembered that despite her struggles, Susan was always committed to her household chores. On the other hand, he hadn't even tried. Realizing this difference, he felt remorse for treating Susan so poorly while she was trying so hard. Now, he shared the household chores in an effort to improve his relationship with his wife. Similarly, Susan and I, now living together, have divided our chores. I'm in charge of cleaning and taking out the trash. Susan handles the laundry, and we alternate cooking duties. We cover for each other's weaknesses and live happily together in our home. As we prepare to get married, we are also expecting a new life in 6 months. Surely our lives will become even more challenging, but we are confident that together we can overcome any obstacle.